2. Niobe and her children. The Theban matrons, organizing a solemn procession to honor Latona, witness Niobe's belief in her own superiority to the goddess. Niobe treats Latona and her children with contempt. In response, Apollo and Artemis, seeking vengeance for their mother's dishonor, destroy all of Niobe's children, and Niobe herself is transformed into a statue. The news of this event spreads rapidly, causing uproar in Lydia and sparking discussion throughout Phrygia and beyond. Before her marriage, Niobe resided in Maeonia and Sipylus. Despite witnessing the punishment of her fellow countrywoman, Arachne, for her arrogance, Niobe remained obstinate and continued to boast. While various factors, including her husband's skill and their noble lineage, contributed to her pride, nothing pleased Niobe more than her own children, despite the warnings against her hubris. Niobe could have been considered the happiest of mothers if she had not been so blinded by her own perceived greatness. Monto, daughter of Tiresias, with the gift of foresight and driven by divine impulse, proclaims in the streets, "Women of Ismenus, heed my words. Offer pious frankincense, prayers, and laurel wreaths to Latona and her children. By my mouth, Latona commands this." The Theban women obey, adorning their temples with laurel leaves, offering frankincense, and supplicating. But behold, Niobe arrives, surrounded by attendants, adorned in Phrygian gold, radiating beauty tempered by anger. With graceful defiance, she tosses her hair and proudly declares, "Why prefer unseen inhabitants of heaven over those before your eyes? Why worship Latona while neglecting my godhead? Tantalus was my father, the Pleiades my mother, mighty Atlas my grandsire who bears the skies, and Zeus my father-in-law. The Phrygian nations fear me. Cadmus's palace submits to my rule. Immense wealth fills my domain with a face worthy of a goddess. Add to this my 7 daughters and sons, along with future sons-in-law and daughters-in-law. What grounds does my pride lack? How dare you prefer Latona, banished and mother of only 2 children, to me? I am fortunate, too great for fortune to harm. Even if she takes much, my blessings surpass apprehensions. If some of my children were taken, I'd still surpass Latona's count. Leave the sacrifice. Remove the laurel from your hair." They comply, leaving the sacrifice undone, whispering adorations. Latona, angered, speaks to her children atop Mount Cynthus, pleading for aid against Niobe's insults. Phoebus and Phoebe swiftly descend upon Cadmus's citadel. Near the walls, Amphion's sons ride spirited steeds. Ismenus, guiding his horse in circles, falls with a dart to his breast. Sipylus, hearing a quiver, succumbs to an arrow. Phaedimus and Tantalus, in the throes of wrestling, are struck by an arrow, falling in pain and death together. They remove the laurel, leaving the sacrifice undone, murmuring gentle adorations. The goddess is indignant. Atop Mount Cynthus, she addresses her children. "Behold, I, your mother, proud of bearing you, yield to no other goddess except Hera. Yet I am questioned if I am a goddess, driven from altars unless you aid me. This is not my only grief. Niobe insults me, daring to prioritize her children and calling me childless, her tongue as profane as her father's." Latona was about to plead further when Phoebus intervened, urging an end to her complaints to hasten Niobe's punishment. Phoebe echoed the sentiment, and they swiftly descended upon Cadmus's citadel.
Near the walls lay a vast plain, trampled by horses, where Amphion's sons rode spirited steeds. Ismenus, guiding his horse in circles, falls with a dart to his breast, dropping the reins and gradually collapsing. Sipylus, hearing a quiver, gives rein to his horse, but an arrow pierces his throat, staining the ground with blood as he falls. Phaedimus and Tantalus, after their riding exercise, engage in wrestling, but an arrow pierces them both as they struggle, groaning and writhing in pain until they breathe their last breath together. Alphenor witnesses the tragedy and rushes to embrace his fallen companions, only to meet the same fate as they did, pierced by the deadly arrow. Meanwhile, the Delian god pierces Alphenor's midriff with fatal precision. As the arrow is pulled out, part of his lungs is dragged forth, and his blood spills forth, marking the end of his life. Damasichthon, however, escapes the first arrow, only to be struck in the leg, causing immense pain. As he attempts to remove the arrow, another finds its mark, piercing his neck deeply. Ilioneus, in a desperate plea, prays to all the gods for mercy, unaware that his fate is sealed. Despite the archer's remorse, his arrow cannot be recalled, and Ilioneus meets his end with the slightest of wounds. The news of the calamity spreads, bringing grief to the people and tears to Niobe's family. Niobe, once proud and envied, now lies among her sons, distributing her last kisses without distinction. In her despair, she challenges Latona to revel in her sorrow, defiant even in defeat. As the bowstring twangs once more, frightening all but Niobe, she finds a newfound boldness in the face of her misfortunes. The sisters stood in mourning attire, their hair disheveled, gathered before the biers of their brothers. One sister, drawing out the weapon lodged in her entrails, about to die, swooned away with her face placed upon her brother. Another sister, attempting to console their grief-stricken parent, fell silent, struck by an unseen wound, her mouth remaining open even after her last breath. Yet another sister, fleeing in vain, fell to the ground. One died atop her sister, while another hid in fear, and one trembled with impending doom. And now 6 being put to death, and having received different wounds, the last only remains. Her mother, covering her with all her body and with all her garments, cries, "Leave me but one, and that the youngest only do I ask out of so many, and that but one." But even as she begged, the youngest sister met her end. Left childless, she sat among her deceased family, her grief turning her heart to stone. The breeze stirred no hair upon her head, her features were devoid of color or life, her eyes stood unmoved in her sad cheeks, and her body remained motionless. Still did she weep on, and enveloped in a hurricane of mighty wind, she was borne away to her native land. There, fixed on the top of a mountain, she dissolves, and even yet does the marble distill tears.
Latona, weary from her journey and thirsty, approached a pond where some laborers were working. Ignoring her need, these peasants rudely disturbed the water, preventing her from drinking and making it muddy. In retribution for their cruelty, the goddess transformed them into frogs. Witnessing this divine punishment, both men and women feared the wrath of the deity and showed even greater reverence for the great godhead who bore the twins. This recent event prompted them to recall and retell the stories of past occurrences, as often happens in such situations. One of them recounted, "In the fertile fields of Lycia, some ancient countrymen once offended the goddess, but they did not escape unpunished. Though the event is not widely known due to the obscure status of those involved, it remains remarkable. I myself have seen the pond and the lake renowned for this miracle. My father, now aged and unable to travel, instructed me to fetch some choice oxen from there, providing me with a guide from that region. As we traversed the pastures, we encountered an ancient altar, blackened with sacrificial ashes, standing amidst a lake surrounded by quivering reeds. My guide halted and whispered timidly, 'May she be propitious to me,' to which I echoed, 'May she be propitious.' I inquired whether it was an altar to the Naiads, Faunus, or some local deity, and the stranger responded with these words, 'Young man, there is no mountain deity for this altar. She claims it as her own, she whom the queenly Hera once banished from the world. Delos, barely persuaded by her pleas, begrudgingly accepted her when it floated as a light island. It was there that Latona, leaning against a palm tree alongside Pallas's tree, gave birth to twins despite Hera's interference. The newly delivered goddess, fleeing Hera, is said to have carried her children in her bosom. Now, weary from her prolonged labor and parched by the scorching sun of Lycia, where the Chimera once roamed, she came upon a lake in a valley. There, some countrymen were gathering osiers, bulrushes, and sedge typical of marshy areas. The Titaness approached and, kneeling, sought to drink from the cool water, but the peasants forbade her. Addressing them, she said, "Why do you deny me water? Water is a common resource, not the exclusive property of anyone. I have come to partake of nature's public bounty, which I humbly request you grant me. I do not seek to bathe my weary limbs, but to quench my thirst. My mouth lacks moisture as I speak, and my jaws are parched, barely allowing passage for my voice. A sip of water would be nectar to me, and I would acknowledge receiving not only life but also sustenance from you. In giving me water, you give me life. Let these children who reach out from my bosom also sway you." And indeed, by chance, the children were reaching out their arms. What person could resist the influence of these kindly words from the goddess? Yet, they persist in hindering her despite her entreaties, even adding threats and abusive language if she does not withdraw. And as if that were not enough, they proceed to muddy the lake itself with their feet and hands, maliciously stirring up the soft mud from the bottom by spitefully jumping to and fro. Latona's thirst turns to resentment. No longer does the daughter of Chaos plead with these unworthy wretches, nor does she endure to utter words beneath the majesty of a goddess. Raising her hands to heaven, she declares, "May you live in that pool forever." Her wish is granted. They delight in submerging themselves in the water, plunging their limbs into the deep pool, raising their heads to swim on the surface, sitting on the bank, and then leaping back into the cold stream. Even beneath the water, they continue their offensive behavior, banishing all shame as they try to maintain their abuse. Their voices become hoarse, their necks swell, and their abusive words stretch their jaws. Their bodies transform. Their backs fuse to their heads, their necks appear severed, their backbone turns green, their belly becomes white. Like newly made frogs, they leap about in the muddy stream.